Chaplain Mansager and students and faculty members. I'm certain I'm not saying anything new to you when I report to you that the Christian church in our day is subject to a variety of types of attack and opposition. We might speak of this opposition from the standpoint of those of a passive and an active opposition. Passive opposition might be those who look upon the Christian church as a has-been and would speak of our day as a post-Christian era. It would point perhaps to the percentage decline of the Christian population around the world, and if they were to be honest, would of course relate this to the worldwide population explosion. Active opposition would include those who aggressively renounce and reject the message of the Christian church, the validity and the place of the Christian church as a viable force in this world. They would perhaps point to the increasing power of secularism, which seeks to satisfy man with the here and now, and would actually contend for an elimination of the value and the meaning of religion as such. Now, in these few moments I have this morning, I cannot do much to counteract this kind of opposition. I would, however, like to share some news with you concerning what is happening in the Christian world today, and share this as a report of world missions, and hope that as you hear these things and apply them to your minds and hearts, your faith and your actions, that they can be of help to you. A verse of Scripture must be for a pastor giving a talk in chapel, I guess, so I'm taking 1 Corinthians 16:9, where Paul says there is a real opportunity here for great and worthwhile work, even though there are many opponents. Last May, in connection with my work as the Asia Secretary for the Board of World Missions of our church, I visited the island nation of Indonesia. The purpose of my visit was, first of all, to see our ALC missionaries at work in Indonesia, but secondly, and perhaps even more important, it was to have contact with the Batak Church, that famous church in the history of Christianity. This Batak church has seen phenomenal growth, even from the very early days of its history, and even down until today. The work among the Batak people, and the Bataks are the people who live on the island of Sumatra, which is the northernmost island on this great island chain of Indonesia. The work among the Batak people began in 1861 by the Rhenish mission from Germany. And today there are 1.5 million members in this church. The bishop of one of the churches, a language division in this church, reports that there has been an average growth of 7,000 members a year down through the history of that church. But recently, a great wave of conversions to Christianity has brought great increases in the membership of the Batak churches, as well as in the churches on the other islands of Indonesia. For example, the Council of Churches reports these almost unbelievable figures, that since 1964, 850,000 new members have become members of the Christian church through baptism in Indonesia. Almost unbelievable. On the Sunday of my visit to Sumatra, I attended a baptismal service where 500 people were baptized. This baptismal service was conducted on a plantation out about 10 kilometers from Medan, which is the capital city of Sumatra. And among these 500 people, there were many families, from grandfather and grandmothers to the grandchildren. Most of these people were plantation workers who had come into Sumatra from the island of Java, which is the island just south of Sumatra. Now, the Javanese language, J-A-V, Javanese language, and the Batak languages are quite different. So in order to really minister to these people, they had to bring in a Japanese evangelist, formerly a government employee, who spoke the Japanese language in reaching these people. In fact, this new congregation to be established in that area is going to have a Japanese-speaking pastor to minister to them. This is like trying to solve the old Norwegian or German or whatever the language problem we had in the earlier days in our country. Now, the baptismal service in itself was an interesting event. A large convoy of buses, trucks, automobiles, and a whole flock of motor scooters left from Medan Central Church to go on a convoy out to this plantation area where they had erected a huge canvas and leafy coverage for the baptismal service. And in this convoy, there were 20 choirs and men's choruses and a band that were going to have part in this service. And it was these services that went on and on. The reason they had so many people and so many choirs was, first of all, to bear a strong witness to the people in the community that the Christian church was moving in. And they brought in all of these people to sort of substantiate and strengthen their witness. And then secondly, they were going to take an offering to help the people to build their first church. And they took 2 offerings during that service, in fact, and that's a good time to bring in a good crowd, if you're going to have this kind of offering. Now, how can one explain such a movement to the Christian church? Of course, the work of the Spirit can never be fully explained in terms of sociological, psychological, cultural, or political categories. And yet we know that the Spirit of God does move in and through such realities. I took the occasion to inquire from a number of the church leaders in Indonesia concerning the reasons for this mass turning to Christianity. Let me point out a couple of them. An important element seems to be with regard to the attitude toward authority, especially the authority of government. In the earlier days in Sumatra, the people who were living inland, who were animistic of background, were ruled by the so-called chieftains. The people living on the coastal areas who were Muslims were ruled by sultans. These people were absolutes in authority. They were like the Lord, and when they spoke, that word was with authority, and nobody would think to disobey. And then all of a sudden World War II came, and the Japanese moved in with their political and military authority, and everything changed as with a blink of the eye. And then following that time came the time of rebellion, leading up to the independence of the Indonesians as over against Holland in 1949, and then the most recent coup, attempted coup by the communists, when hundreds of thousands of people were slain as there was resistance against this attempted coup. Much bloodshed, fear, and terror throughout all of Indonesia. Now, these series of events shook the people to their roots from any reliance they might have on human authority. People began to ask, where is authority? Where is security? They began to turn to Christianity. And it is understandable that people who have gone through such terrific times of despair and turmoil would turn to a new orientation in life and a new commitment in their lives. And Christianity has seemed to bring this kind of an answer to them. The Ephraim, who is really the bishop of one of the churches, referring to these 500 people who were going to be baptized the next day, said that many of them had been members of the Communistic Party or of labor and farm organizations which had communistic leanings. And they had joined these organizations as an act of self-preservation and security during the difficult times. But now that the pressures had been relieved, the people were looking for help in various ways, and this was a time again that the Christian church came into being, into having validity in their lives. In addition to the political factors, there was a strong tension between the Muslims and the Christians. Some of the educated lay leaders among the Christians told of their opinion that the Mohammedans were and are unable to give leadership to nations and to peoples in our generation. They are unable to understand the modern situation, and therefore they are really a frustrated people. These laymen also pointed out that the Muslims have something that's called a double ethics, which means that they may speak the truth to their fellow Muslims, but they are not at all required to speak the truth to non-believers. And then he raised the question of how such an ethical base might serve as a foundation for such a society. The third point they pointed to was this: the lack of spiritual content in Mohammedanism, as over against a sense of spiritual content and power which is present in the Indonesian churches, in the Batak churches particularly. And then we have the important place of the very active part which the church played in this time through its evangelists, through its lay witnesses, to try to reach these people in this time of confusion, in their searching, to bring them the message of the gospel, the message of the Word of God, which has then brought them into this place of commitment to Christ. Now, the task of providing leadership for the people in that situation is a very important part which the churches in Indonesia as well as the churches around the world are concerned about these days. If a church doubles in size immediately, where are you going to get the people to help these people in a sense of their spiritual witness, one to man, or spiritual leadership of pastors for congregations, for example? Even the task of providing that many pastors, if they were available, would be tremendous. This is why you have to think in terms of personnel and facilities and funds and time to get people like that ready. Incidentally, this is one of the reasons why at least one of our missionaries, who happens to be a former Augie, Ed Nijhuis, is a pastor teaching in the seminary at Nomensen University in Sumatra, and making his real contribution toward meeting this particular need. But the Indonesians recognize they can't wait for that time. And so the pastors from areas where the revival has not been so great have now been loaned to these areas to work. And because the Batak church from the very early days have been a church that has strongly emphasized the lay work of the lay ministry, they have also become involved in how to take care of these new Christians. Now, I share this report with you from Indonesia. You may say, oh, this is a strange sort of a world mission report. But it seems to me this is an illustration of a place of how God is moving and how God works in a given situation. And I trust that you may gather from this, first of all, a sense of joy in knowing that these things are happening in a place like Indonesia. I hope also that you'll be able to recognize something of how God does move and how He works in the lives of people and through nations and through peoples to accomplish His purpose. And then I hope, last of all, that each one of you will ask this most important question: how can my life somehow be related to this? God has purposes. And it's not only nations of the world and political and military powers that are at work, but God's Spirit is at work. He's working in the times of deep turmoil when nothing else seems to have the answer. Then how can your life and my life be involved in that? That's where world missions comes in. That's where the witness of the Christian church comes. May the Lord bless each of you, that you might say to yourself, how do I fit in this whole thing?